The grand hall of the Moonstone Palace buzzed with anticipation as hundreds of werewolves gathered for the most important ceremony in decades. Alpha King Damien stood at the altar, waiting to claim his bride and secure his bloodline forever. But when rogue wolves burst through the massive oak doors, everything changed in an instant. Amara pressed herself against the stone wall, her heart hammering as chaos erupted around her. As a lowly kitchen servant, she should have run. Instead, she found herself frozen as the Alpha King's piercing golden eyes locked onto hers across the mayhem. In 3 powerful strides, he reached her, his massive frame shielding her from the violence. "Act like you're mine," he growled, pulling her against his chest with surprising gentleness. What happened next sent shockwaves through the supernatural world. Because Amara wasn't just any servant girl. She was the last living heir of the moon goddess bloodline, hidden away for 20 years, and her touch awakened powers in the Alpha King that hadn't been seen for centuries. But here's what will blow your mind. What was her true connection to the rogue attack? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The moment Damien's skin touched hers, electricity shot through both their bodies, like lightning striking ancient earth. The air around them shimmered with an otherworldly silver glow that made every wolf in the vicinity stop mid-fight to stare. Amara gasped as warmth flooded her veins, and for the first time in her life, the strange dreams that had plagued her since childhood began to make sense. Damien's eyes widened in shock. The mate bond. He could feel it snapping into place with the force of a hurricane, but this was impossible. He was supposed to mate with Lady Cassandra, the carefully chosen bride who stood frozen at the altar, her perfectly arranged bouquet falling forgotten from her trembling hands. "What trickery is this?" snarled Marcus, the leader of the rogue pack, his yellow fangs dripping with saliva as he shifted between human and wolf form. But even he seemed affected by the power radiating from the unlikely pair. "The kitchen wench? You would claim a servant over your betrothed?" Amara wanted to protest, to explain that this was all a terrible mistake, but the words died in her throat as memories that weren't quite her own began flooding her mind. Images of silver moonlight, ancient rituals, and a woman who looked remarkably like her own reflection standing beside previous Alpha Kings throughout history. "She bears the mark," whispered Elder Thorn, the oldest werewolf in the kingdom, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent hall. All eyes turned to Amara's exposed shoulder, where her torn dress revealed what everyone had assumed was merely a birthmark. But in the strange silver light emanating from her skin, the crescent moon symbol glowed like molten starlight. The crowd erupted into chaos. Some wolves fell to their knees in reverence, others backed away in fear, and the rogues seemed torn between attacking and fleeing. Lady Cassandra let out a shriek that could shatter glass before fainting dead away, her elaborate wedding gown pooling around her like spilled cream. "The moon blessed," Damien breathed, his voice filled with awe and something that might have been terror. "But they're extinct. They've been gone for 2 centuries. Amara finally found her voice, though it came out as barely a whisper. "I don't understand what's happening. I work in the kitchens. I'm nobody." "You're not nobody," Marcus growled, his eyes fixed on her with hungry intensity. "You're exactly what we came here for. Did you really think we attacked on your mating day by coincidence, Your Majesty?" His laugh was cold and sharp as winter wind. "We've been watching her for months, waiting for the right moment to strike." The revelation hit Damien like a physical blow. The rogue attack hadn't been random chaos. It had been calculated, planned around Amara's presence. But how had they known what she was when she clearly had no idea herself? "The prophecy," Elder Thorn said, his ancient voice carrying the weight of centuries. "The last moon blessed would awaken during the kingdom's darkest hour, when the Alpha King's power had begun to fade. She would either restore the old magic or destroy everything we've built." Amara felt Damien's grip on her tighten protectively, but she could sense his internal struggle. The political implications were staggering. His engagement to Lady Cassandra had been arranged to unite two powerful packs and strengthen his position. Claiming a servant girl as his mate, even one with a legendary bloodline, could destabilize everything. But the mate bond pulsing between them was undeniable, and with each passing second, she could feel something ancient and powerful stirring within her blood. Something that made the very air around them thrum with energy and caused the massive crystal chandelier overhead to chime like silver bells in an unfelt wind. The question remained, would this awakening save them all, or would it herald the destruction of everything the werewolf kingdom had fought to build? The silence stretched like a taut wire ready to snap. Every eye in the grand hall remained fixed on the impossible scene before them. The rogue wolf's massive form still partially shifted, his arm wrapped possessively around the trembling servant girl, while Alpha King Theron stood frozen at the altar, his bride-to-be forgotten behind him. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs so violently, she was certain everyone could hear it. The stranger's grip on her waist burned through the thin fabric of her servant's dress, and she could feel the raw power radiating from his skin like heat from a forge. His scent overwhelmed her senses, wild pine, storm-touched earth, and something darker that made her wolf stir restlessly beneath her carefully constructed human facade. "Release her immediately." Theron's voice cut through the tension, each word dripping with the authority of centuries of royal bloodline. His own wolf pressed close to the surface, golden eyes flickering with barely contained rage. "You dare enter my domain, interrupt my ceremony, and lay hands on one under my protection?" The rogue's laugh was low and rough, like gravel scraping against steel. "Your protection?" His grip tightened almost imperceptibly, and Sarah bit back a gasp. "Funny how you protect those you keep in chains?" "I am no one's mate," Sarah whispered, finally finding her voice, though it came out shakier than she'd intended. "There's been a mistake." The stranger looked down at her then, and Sarah's breath caught. Up close, his eyes weren't just silver. They were like molten mercury, ancient and knowing in a way that made her feel exposed, as if he could see straight through every lie she'd ever told. A jagged scar ran from his left temple to his jaw, and she found herself wondering what battle had marked him so deeply. "No mistake, little wolf," he murmured, his voice pitched low enough that only she could hear. "I can smell what you really are beneath all that carefully crafted deception." Ice flooded Sarah's veins. Impossible. She'd spent years perfecting the suppressants that masked her true scent, the careful control that kept her wolf hidden. No one could... Enough! Theron's roar echoed through the vaulted ceiling, and several guests flinched. The Alpha King began stalking forward, his massive frame rippling with the promise of violence. "Guards!" But before the royal guards could move, the rogue shifted his stance, and suddenly there was a blade pressed against Sarah's throat. Not threatening. The touch was too gentle for that, but the message was clear. She felt the cold kiss of steel against her pulse point and forced herself to remain perfectly still. "I wouldn't," the stranger said conversationally. "This doesn't have to end in bloodshed, Your Majesty. I've claimed my mate according to the old laws, laws that even you cannot break." A ripple of shocked murmurs swept through the assembled crowd. The old laws hadn't been invoked in over a century, but they were sacred, binding. If a wolf truly recognized his destined mate, no force on earth, not even a king, could separate them. "The old laws require proof," came a cool voice from the crowd. Elder Matthias, the pack's most senior advisor, stepped forward with his walking stick tapping against the marble floor. His milky eyes were sharp despite his age. "Claims can be made by any desperate fool, but the mate bond," he smiled thinly, "that cannot be faked." Sarah's mouth went dry. She knew what came next. The verification ritual was ancient, primal, and would strip away every carefully constructed barrier she'd built around her true nature. If they discovered what she really was, what blood ran through her veins... The rogue seemed to sense her panic. His free hand found hers, fingers intertwining in a gesture that somehow felt both possessive and reassuring. "Then let's settle this," he said. never taking his eyes off Theron. But not here. The ritual requires sacred ground. The Moonstone Circle, Elder Matthias nodded slowly. At midnight, when Luna's power runs strongest, if the bond is true, it will be revealed. If not, he shrugged eloquently. If not, you die, Theron finished, his voice deadly quiet. Slowly, painfully. And your body feeds the ravens. The stranger's smile was all teeth. Wouldn't have it any other way. Sarah wanted to scream that none of this was necessary, that she wasn't anyone's mate, that she was just a servant who cleaned floors and emptied chamber pots. But the words died in her throat as she caught sight of Lady Vivienne's face. The would-be queen's expression had shifted from shock to something far more calculating, her pale blue eyes fixed on Sarah with uncomfortable intensity. "Very well," Theron said finally. "But until midnight, she remains under guard, and you—" His lips curled back to reveal elongated canines. "You get to spend the next few hours contemplating exactly how much you're willing to suffer for this elaborate suicide." The rogue inclined his head mockingly. "I appreciate your Majesty's concern, but some things are worth any price." His eyes found Sarah's again, and she shivered at what she saw burning in their silver depths. The silence that followed Kyle's declaration stretched like a taut wire ready to snap, every eye in the grand hall fixed upon me, and I felt the weight of their stares like physical blows. My heart hammered against my ribs so violently I was certain everyone could hear it. King Magnus rose from his throne, his imposing figure casting a shadow across the marble floor. His golden eyes blazed with fury, but beneath the rage I caught something else. Calculation. "You dare interrupt my ceremony with such nonsense?" His voice carried the authority of centuries of rule. Kael's grip on my hand tightened, and I felt the tremor of barely contained power rippling through him. "I dare claim what is rightfully mine, Magnus. The mate bond cannot be denied." A bitter laugh escaped the king's lips. "A servant? You would claim a nameless servant as your mate?" His gaze swept over me dismissively. "Even if such a bond existed, which I highly doubt, she is nothing. No one." The words stung more than I expected. I had always been invisible in this castle, a shadow moving through corridors, serving those who never bothered to learn my name. But hearing it stated so bluntly before hundreds of witnesses made something inside me recoil. "Her name is Lyra," Kyle said, and I started. I had never told him my name, and she is far from nothing. How could he possibly know? We had never spoken before today. I studied his profile, noting the sharp line of his jaw, the way his dark hair fell across his forehead. There was something familiar about him, like a half-remembered dream that lingered upon waking. Lady Seraphina, still standing at the altar in her elaborate gown, finally found her voice. "This is preposterous. Guards, remove this madman at once." Her perfectly composed mask had slipped, revealing the fury beneath. But the guards hesitated. Even they could sense the power radiating from Kyle, the dangerous energy that marked him as something more than an ordinary werewolf. He was an alpha in his own right, that much was clear. "I invoke the ancient law of mate claim," Kyle announced, his voice carrying to every corner of the hall. "By the old ways, I have the right to challenge for what is mine." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. The ancient laws had not been invoked in over 2 centuries. I barely understood what was happening, but the sudden tension in the air told me everything had just shifted dramatically. King Magnus's expression darkened further. "The ancient laws died with the old kingdom, rogue. You have no standing here." "Then you deny the very foundations upon which your rule stands?" Kyle's question was a trap, cleverly laid. To deny the ancient laws would undermine the legitimacy of the royal bloodline itself. As this verbal battle raged around me, something strange began to happen. The pendant, hidden beneath my rough servant's dress, my mother's last gift to me, grew warm against my skin. It had never done that before. A tingling sensation spread through my body, starting from where the metal touched my chest and radiating outward. I glanced around the hall with new awareness and gasped. Faint threads of light seemed to connect every person present, invisible bonds that pulsed with energy I had never noticed before. Most were silver or gold, but some glowed with deeper hues, red for anger, blue for fear, green for jealousy. It was as if I could see the very emotions flowing between people. My gaze found Kyle, and my breath caught. The thread connecting us blazed brilliant white, so bright it nearly hurt to look at. But there was something else. Multiple threads of different colors stretched from him toward various points throughout the kingdom, as if he were connected to far more than just this room. The vision lasted only seconds before fading, leaving me dizzy and confused. What was happening to me? I had never experienced anything like this before. Enough! King Magnus's roar brought my attention back to the immediate danger. I will not have my ceremony disrupted by the ravings of an exile. Guards! This time the guards moved. A dozen armed warriors stepped forward, their weapons gleaming in the torchlight. But Kyle merely smiled, a predator's grin that promised violence. I hoped it wouldn't come to this, he murmured, so quietly only I could hear. Then, louder, very well, Magnus. But know that you force my hand. He raised his free arm, and power exploded outward from him like a shockwave. The guards stumbled backward, and several of the weaker wolves in the crowd actually fell to their knees, overwhelmed by the sheer force of his presence. In that moment of chaos, Kyle turned to me, his silver eyes intense and urgent. Lyra, I need you to trust me. Can you do that? I should have said no. I should have pulled away, declared this madness, begged the king's forgiveness. Instead, looking into those impossible eyes, I found myself nodding. Then hold tight, he whispered, and the world exploded into motion. The tension in the grand hall had reached a breaking point. Guards surrounded us, their silver weapons gleaming in the torchlight, while the Alpha King's eyes burned with fury that seemed to radiate heat across the marble floor. I could feel Kyle's arm tighten protectively around my waist, his body coiled like a spring ready to unleash violence. Stand down, Kyle, the Alpha King commanded, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. Release the servant and submit to judgment for your crimes against the crown. Kyle's laugh was dark and bitter. Submit? Like my father did when you banished our pack for speaking truth? Like my mother did when she died in exile? His grip on me shifted, and I felt the tremor of barely contained rage in his muscles. I think not, Your Majesty. Lady Seraphina stood frozen at the altar, her wedding gown a stark white against the chaos erupting around her. Her hands clutched her bouquet so tightly that rose petals fell like drops of blood to the floor. For a moment, our eyes met across the distance, and I saw something unexpected there. Not anger or jealousy, but relief. You know nothing of your father's crimes, the Alpha King snarled, taking a step forward. The crowd parted before him like water, their fear palpable. He consorted with dark magic, threatened the very foundations of our society. His banishment was just. My father sought answers about the ancient bloodlines, Kyle shot back. He questioned why certain families were wiped from existence, why their histories were burned from our records, and for that curiosity you destroyed him. Ancient bloodlines. The words sent an icy chill down my spine, and suddenly the mysterious dreams that had plagued me for months took on new meaning. Images of silver-eyed women wielding impossible power, of wolves that could shift the very elements, of a great war that had torn the supernatural world apart. Enough of this madness, Elder Blackthorn interjected, his walking stick tapping sharply against the marble as he approached. His ancient eyes fixed on me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. Girl, speak your name. I opened my mouth, but no sound emerged. What could I say? That I didn't remember anything before the age of 12? That I'd been found wandering the forest with no memory of my past, taken in by the castle staff out of pity? She doesn't know, Kyle said quietly, and there was something almost gentle in his voice now. She doesn't know what she is, does she? Elder Blackthorn's face went ashen. Impossible. They were all destroyed, every last one of them. Were they? Kyle's smile was sharp as a blade. Or were some hidden away, their memories locked, their power dormant until the right moment? The Alpha King's expression shifted from rage to something closer to fear. You speak of the Moon Shadow line, but they were exterminated 2 decades ago for good reason. Their power was too dangerous, too volatile. Moon Shadow. The name hit me like a physical blow, unlocking something deep within my mind. Suddenly I could see flashes of memories that weren't quite memories. A woman with silver hair singing lullabies in a language I somehow understood. Wolves that moved like liquid shadow. A great fire that consumed everything I'd ever known. My knees buckled and Kyle caught me, his arms strong and steady. "Easy," he murmured against my ear. "I've got you." "This cannot be." Lady Seraphina spoke for the first time, her melodic voice cutting through the chaos. The prophecy spoke of the last moon shadow. It said she would either unite the packs or destroy them all. "Prophecy?" I whispered, looking up at Kyle. "What prophecy?" His jaw tightened. "The one they've spent 20 years trying to prevent. The one that says when the last daughter of the Moon Shadow line awakens to her power, she will choose the fate of all werewolves. Either she will bind the packs together in peace, or she will tear down the old order entirely." Around us, the crowd had begun to murmur, fear and excitement mixing in equal measure. Some dropped to their knees, as if recognizing something ancient and powerful. Others backed away, terror written across their faces. The Alpha King's hand moved to the ceremonial sword at his side. "Then she dies here, tonight, before her power can manifest." But as his fingers closed around the hilt, something extraordinary happened. The torches lining the great hall flickered and dimmed, then blazed brighter than ever before. The very air seemed to shimmer with energy, and I felt something awakening inside me, something vast and terrible and beautiful. Kyle's eyes met mine, and in them I saw not fear, but wonder. "Welcome to your inheritance, little wolf," he said softly. The Alpha King drew his blade, but he was already too late. Power coursed through my veins like liquid moonlight, and I finally understood why Kyle had risked everything to claim me as his mate. The last moon shadow had awakened, and nothing would ever be the same. The ancient oak doors of the council chamber groaned open, their sound echoing through the cavernous stone hall like a death knell. Sarah's bare feet whispered against the cold marble as guards flanked her on either side, their silver-tipped spears glinting in the torchlight. The scent of old magic hung heavy in the air, making her skin prickle with an awareness she couldn't quite name. 20 pairs of eyes tracked her movement as she was led toward the center of the circular room. The Council of Alphas sat in their high-backed chairs carved from ironwood, their faces masks of barely contained hostility. At the head of the assembly, Alpha King Aldrich lounged with deceptive casualness, his golden eyes never leaving her face. So, his voice rolled through the chamber like distant thunder. "This is the girl who has turned my kingdom upside down in a single evening." Sarah kept her chin raised despite the tremor in her hands. She'd spent 3 years perfecting the art of invisibility, of being nothing more than a shadow moving through the castle halls. Now, under the weight of so much scrutiny, she felt exposed down to her very bones. "Tell me, little servant," Aldrich continued, rising from his throne with predatory grace, "what makes you so special that Kieran Blackwood would risk everything to claim you?" The question hung in the air like a blade waiting to fall. Sarah opened her mouth to speak, but before she could form words, the chamber doors burst open once more. Kieran strode in, his dark hair still disheveled from their escape, his clothes torn and bloodied from fighting through the king's guards. "Let her go, Aldrich." His voice carried the unmistakable growl of his wolf, barely leashed. "This is between you and me." A ripple of shocked murmurs swept through the council. Several alphas half rose from their seats, hands moving instinctively toward their weapons. But Aldrich merely smiled, the expression cold and calculating. "How noble," the king drawled. "The rogue returns to save his mate." Tell me, Blackwood, was she worth becoming an outcast? Worth abandoning your birthright and your pack? Kieran's eyes flicked to Syrah, and she saw something flicker in their depths, regret, perhaps, or determination. Some things are worth any price. Even war. Aldrich's voice dropped to a whisper that somehow carried to every corner of the room. Because that's what you've started here tonight. By claiming a mate during my ceremony, by defying the ancient laws, you've given every ambitious alpha reason to question my authority. The truth of those words settled over the chamber like a shroud. Syrah could feel the tension crackling between the assembled alphas, old rivalries and territorial disputes surfacing in their scents, anger, ambition, the metallic tang of barely restrained violence. The girl is the key to all of this, continued a gravelly voice from the shadows. Elder Marcus stepped into the torchlight, his ancient eyes fixed on Syrah with an intensity that made her blood run cold. I can smell it on her. The old magic, the forbidden bloodlines. She's not what she appears to be. Syrah's heart hammered against her ribs. The pendant hidden beneath her rough servant's dress seemed to burn against her skin, as if responding to the elder's words. She'd always known she was different, had always felt the strange pull of power in her veins, but she'd never understood what it meant. Impossible, breathed Alpha Connor from the Eastern Territories, his nostrils flaring as he tested the air. The old bloodlines died out centuries ago. The king made sure of that. Aldrich's face had gone very still, his golden eyes now fixed on Syrah with a new and terrible understanding. "Remove her dress," he commanded quietly. "No." Kieran stepped forward, his body coiled for violence. "I won't let you—" "Stand down, Blackwood." The king's power rolled through the chamber like a physical force, pressing against every wolf present. Even Kieran staggered under its weight. "Guards." Syrah closed her eyes as rough hands reached for her, knowing that the moment they saw the pendant, everything would change. The silver disc had been her mother's dying gift, passed down through generations of women whose names had been struck from the history books. She'd never understood why it had to remain hidden, had never questioned her mother's desperate warnings. Now, as the leather cord was lifted from around her neck and the pendant caught the torchlight, the assembled alphas drew a collective breath. The silver bore an intricate design, a wolf and a raven intertwined around a crescent moon, the symbol of a bloodline that was supposed to be extinct. "Moonseer," Elder Marcus whispered, the word falling into the silence like a stone into still water. Aldrich's face had gone pale beneath his golden tan. "Impossible. I killed them all. Every last one of the Moon children died 20 years ago. All but one, it seems." The elder's voice carried a mixture of wonder and terror. "The last daughter of the Moonseer line stands before us." The pendant pulsed with sudden light, and Syrah felt something ancient stirring in her blood, awakening after years of careful slumber. The Alpha King's palace felt different in the pre-dawn darkness. Where yesterday it had been filled with celebration and chaos, now an oppressive silence hung over the stone corridors like a shroud. Lyra pressed herself against the cold wall, listening for the sound of approaching footsteps as she made her way toward the servants' quarters. She shouldn't be wandering the halls. After Kyle's dramatic claim, she'd been moved to a guest chamber, a luxury that felt more like a prison. But sleep had eluded her, and the weight of Ilara's cryptic words pressed against her mind like a persistent ache. "Your bloodline carries both creation and destruction." The memory of power coursing through her veins during the ceremony made her hands tremble. Whatever had happened when Kyle touched her, whatever force had awakened within her, it terrified her more than his claim of mating bonds. A soft, scraping sound echoed from the shadows ahead. Lyra froze, her heart hammering against her ribs. A figure emerged from an alcove, not a guard, but Marcus, the head steward who had overseen her work in the kitchens for the past 3 years. "Lyra." His voice carried a mixture of concern and something else, fear. "You shouldn't be here." "I couldn't sleep," she whispered, stepping closer. Marcus had always been kind to her, one of the few who treated the servants with genuine respect. "Marcus, I need to ask you something. About my parents. His weathered face went pale in the moonlight streaming through the tall windows. Child, some questions are better left unasked. But I need to know. Her voice grew stronger, desperation bleeding through. That woman yesterday, Ilara. She knew something about my bloodline. She said I was dangerous. Marcus glanced around nervously, then grasped her arm with surprising gentleness. Come with me, quickly. He led her through a series of narrow passages she'd never seen before, servant corridors that wound behind the main palace walls. Finally, they emerged into a small chamber filled with ledgers and records, the steward's private office. Marcus lit a single candle, its flame casting dancing shadows across the walls. What I'm about to tell you, it could mean death for both of us if the wrong ears hear it. Lyra's mouth went dry, but she nodded. Your parents didn't die in a hunting accident, Marcus began, his voice barely above a whisper. They were murdered, hunted down by order of the previous Alpha King, Damien's father. The words hit her like physical blows. What? Why would he? Because your mother was Luna Seraphina, the Moonblood Pack. Marcus's eyes reflected the candlelight, ancient and sad, the last of her kind. And your father was her chosen mate, a powerful warrior who defied an entire kingdom to protect her. Lyra felt the world tilt around her. That's impossible. I'm just a servant. I'm nobody. You're nobody, because that's what kept you alive. Marcus moved to a hidden compartment behind one of the ledgers, withdrawing a small wrapped bundle. When your parents were killed, a few loyal servants smuggled you out. We changed your name, your identity, raised you in obscurity. Her hands shook as she unwrapped the bundle. Inside lay a silver pendant unlike anything she'd ever seen, a crescent moon intertwined with what looked like flowing water, all crafted from metal that seemed to pulse with its own inner light. The Moonblood Pack were the original werewolves, Marcus continued. Legend says they could command not just their own transformations, but influence the very nature of lycanthropy itself. They could strengthen the bond between human and wolf consciousness, or, he paused, swallowing hard, or they could sever it entirely. Destroy it, Lyra whispered, understanding flooding through her. This was why Ilara had looked at her with such fear and reverence, why Kyle's touch had awakened something powerful and terrifying within her. The previous king feared what your bloodline represented, the power to unite all werewolves under one true Luna, or the ability to end their very existence. So he ordered them wiped out. But why now? Lyra clutched the pendant, feeling warmth spread from the metal into her palm. Why is this happening now? Marcus's expression grew grim. Because somehow, that rogue werewolf knew exactly what you are. His claiming you wasn't random, child. It was calculated. A chill ran down Lyra's spine as she remembered Kyle's confident words, the way he'd looked at her as if he'd been searching for her specifically. You think he planned this? I think there are forces at work here that none of us fully understand. And you, Lyra of the Moonblood line, are at the center of it all. Outside the small window, the first hints of dawn painted the sky in shades of rose and gold. Somewhere in the palace, she knew Kyle would be waiting for answers she wasn't ready to give. But now, with the weight of her true heritage settling around her shoulders like a mantle, she finally understood why everyone looked at her with such intensity. She wasn't just a servant anymore. She was potentially the most dangerous woman in the kingdom. The moon hung heavy and silver above the ancient stone circle as Kira followed Damon deeper into the sacred grove. Her bare feet found purchase on the moss-covered ground, each step awakening something primal within her blood. The ceremonial gown she'd hastily donned billowed around her like liquid starlight, its fabric seeming to pulse with an otherworldly energy. Are you certain about this? Damon's voice carried on the night wind, rough with barely contained emotion. He hadn't touched her since they'd left the Great Hall, but she could feel the invisible thread between them growing stronger with each passing moment. Kira's hand instinctively went to the pendant at her throat, the one her grandmother had given her before she died. It was warm against her skin, warmer than it had ever been. I need answers, Damon, about what I am. about why my blood calls to yours." He stopped abruptly, turning to face her. In the moonlight, his eyes held flecks of gold that seemed to dance within a fire. "What if the answers change everything between us?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Kira stepped closer, close enough to breathe in his wild, woodsy scent. "Then we'll face whatever comes, together." Something shifted in his expression, a wall crumbling that she hadn't even realized was there. Without another word, he reached for her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers as if they'd been made to fit together. The stone circle loomed before them, ancient symbols carved deep into each monolith. Kira gasped as recognition flooded through her, not from memory, but from something deeper, something written in her very DNA. Her grandmother's lullabies suddenly made sense, the strange words that had seemed like nonsense, now revealing themselves as the old tongue, the language of the first werewolves. "The Moonlight Circle," she whispered, the name rising unbidden from her lips. "This is where they bound the covenant." Damon's grip on her hand tightened. "How do you know that name? That history was lost centuries ago." Before she could answer, the pendant at her throat blazed with silver light, so bright that they both had to shield their eyes. When the radiance faded, they found themselves no longer alone. A figure materialized from the shadows between the stones, an elderly woman with silver hair that cascaded like a waterfall down her back and eyes that held the wisdom of ages. She wore robes that seemed woven from moonbeams themselves, and when she smiled, Kira's heart lurched with a mixture of fear and recognition. "Grandmother?" The word escaped as barely more than a breath. "Hello, little moon daughter." The woman's voice carried the sound of wind through ancient trees. "I told you we would meet again when the time was right." Damon moved protectively in front of Kira, his body tensing as his wolf rose to the surface. "You're supposed to be dead. Death is but another doorway for those who carry the old magic." The woman's gaze shifted to Damon, and her expression softened. "Peace, young Alpha. I mean no harm to either of you, but the time for hiding is over. The prophecy stirs to life, and my granddaughter must learn her true heritage before the next full moon." "What prophecy?" Kira stepped around Damon, drawn forward by an invisible force. "You always spoke in riddles. I need the truth now." Her grandmother, or the spirit that wore her form, gestured to the stones around them. Long ago, when the first wolves walked between worlds, there was a great sundering. The Moonlight bloodline was charged with maintaining the balance, with keeping the veil between realms intact. But power corrupts, and the line was nearly destroyed in civil war. The symbols on the stones began to glow, pulsing in rhythm with Kira's heartbeat. She could feel power rushing through her veins like liquid fire, awakening abilities she'd never known she possessed. "The last true Moonlight was your great-great-grandmother," the spirit continued. "She hid among humans, diluting the bloodline to keep it safe. But blood calls to blood, and magic always finds a way." Damon's voice was tight with tension. "The rogue attacks. They're not random, are they?" "The Shadow Court has awakened," the spirit confirmed, her form already beginning to fade. "They seek to tear down the veil, to merge the worlds and rule over the chaos that follows. They know what Kira is, and they will stop at nothing to either claim her power or destroy it." Kira felt the weight of destiny settling on her shoulders like a mantle. "How do I stop them?" "Learn to wield what flows in your blood. Trust in the bond that ties you to this one." Her grandmother's eyes shifted meaningfully to Damon. "And remember, the greatest power lies not in destruction, but in the choice to protect what matters most." The apparition dissolved into silver mist, leaving them alone once more in the circle of stones. But the air still hummed with residual magic, and Kira could feel her world reshaping itself around this new truth. She was the last Moonlight, and somehow everything depended on what she chose to do next. The tension in the great hall crackled like lightning as Kyle's words hung in the air. Mira felt every eye boring into her, the weight of their stares making her skin crawl. She wanted to disappear, to melt into the marble floor beneath her feet, but Kyle's arm remained firm around her waist, anchoring her to this nightmare. "Impossible," King Aldrich snarled, his golden eyes blazing with fury. "She's nothing but a servant. You dare mock the sacred bond in my own hall?" Kyle's laugh was dark and dangerous. "Mock it? I'm honoring it more than you ever did, old man. The moon goddess doesn't care about your politics or your arranged matches. She speaks to those who listen." Mira's heart hammered against her ribs as she caught sight of Lady Seraphina's face, twisted with rage and humiliation. The Alpha King's intended mate looked ready to shift and tear Mira's throat out with her bare teeth. "Release her this instant," Aldrich commanded, his voice carrying the full weight of his alpha power. Several lesser wolves in the crowd whimpered and dropped to their knees, but Kyle remained standing, unmoved. "No," Kyle replied simply, and the single word sent shockwaves through the assembly. No one defied the Alpha King so brazenly and lived to tell about it. Mira felt something stirring deep within her chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with the strange pull she felt toward this dangerous stranger. It terrified her more than the king's wrath. "You've just signed your death warrant, brother," Prince Damien said, stepping forward with his hand on his sword hilt. "And hers." The word brother hit Mira like a physical blow. She looked between the two men, noting similarities she'd missed before: the sharp jawline, the aristocratic bearing, the way they both commanded attention without trying. Kyle was royal blood, which meant she was standing in the middle of a family feud with stakes she couldn't begin to understand. "Always so dramatic, Damien," Kyle drawled, but his muscles tensed beneath his shirt. "Though I suppose you would be, considering you just watched your future crown slip through your fingers." "The crown was never yours to lose," Damien shot back. "Father banished you. You have no claim here." "Don't I?" Kyle's smile was sharp as a blade. "The old laws are clear about mates, especially true mates. Even banishment can't override the goddess's will." Mira found her voice at last, though it came out as barely a whisper. "I don't understand any of this. Please, I just want to go back to the kitchens." Kyle's expression softened as he looked down at her, and for a moment she saw something vulnerable flicker across his features. "You can't go back, little moon. Not after this. Not after they've seen what you are to me." "What I am to you," she repeated, confusion and anger finally overriding her fear. "I don't even know you. You can't just claim someone like a piece of property." "She speaks sense," King Aldrich said, seizing on her words. "The girl clearly doesn't accept your so-called claim. The bond requires mutual recognition." Kyle's jaw tightened. "Give it time. She'll understand soon enough." "Time you don't have," Lady Seraphina spoke for the first time, her voice like poisoned honey. "Guards, seize them both. The rogue will face judgment for this insult, and the servant will be questioned about her role in this conspiracy." Several armored wolves began moving toward them, and Mira felt panic rise in her throat. But before she could cry out, Kyle moved with inhuman speed, spinning her behind him as he faced the approaching guards. "I wouldn't," he warned, and something in his tone made them hesitate. "You all know what I'm capable of. Do you really want to test me with my mate's safety at stake?" The word mate sent another jolt through Mira's system, awakening something she'd kept buried for years. She could feel her wolf stirring, responding to his presence in ways that should be impossible. She'd never shown any sign of being able to shift, had always been dismissed as one of the unfortunate humans born into werewolf families. But now, with Kyle so close, she could feel ancient power awakening in her blood. "Stand down," King Aldrich commanded his guards, but his eyes never left Kyle. "This ends now. You will release the girl and submit to justice, or I will personally tear you apart." "Try it," Kyle challenged, his own wolf rising to the surface. The air around him shimmered with barely contained power. "But know that if you harm her, if any of you so much as touch her, I'll burn this entire kingdom to the ground." The conviction in his voice sent chills down Mira's spine. She realized with growing horror that he meant every word, and somehow, impossibly, she could feel the truth of his claim resonating in her very bones. The mate bond was real, whether she understood it or not, and that terrified her more than anything else. The ancient stone corridors of the castle seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy as Lyra followed the spectral figure deeper into the forgotten depths. Each step echoed with whispers of the past, and she could feel the weight of centuries pressing down upon her shoulders like a heavy cloak. "Where are you taking me?" she called out to the translucent woman who glided ahead but received no answer. The figure's silver hair flowed behind her like moonlight on water, and Lyra caught glimpses of a face that bore an unsettling resemblance to her own. Meanwhile, Kael prowled the castle grounds with barely contained fury. His pack had spread throughout the territory, searching for any trace of Lyra's scent, but the trail had gone cold near the eastern wing. The Alpha King's guards watched him with wary eyes, their hands never straying far from their weapons. She couldn't have simply vanished. Kael growled to his beta, Marcus, who approached with cautious steps. "There's something else at work here." Marcus nodded grimly. The servants speak of strange lights in the abandoned sections of the castle. They say the old magic stirs again. Before Kael could respond, a bone-chilling howl pierced the night air. It came from somewhere deep within the castle's bowels, a sound that spoke of ancient power and awakening fury. Every werewolf within miles felt their blood run cold. Far below, Lyra found herself standing in a circular chamber carved from black stone. Symbols she didn't recognize covered every surface, pulsing with a faint silver light that seemed to emanate from within the rock itself. At the center of the room stood an ornate mirror, its surface rippling like disturbed water despite the stillness of the air. "Look," the spectral woman whispered, her voice carrying the weight of ages. "Look and see what you truly are." Lyra approached the mirror hesitantly, her heart hammering against her ribs. As she gazed into its depths, the surface began to clear, revealing not her reflection but visions of the past. She saw herself as a child, but not as she remembered. In the mirror, her eyes glowed with silver fire, and shadows bent to her will like living things. "The Shadow Moon bloodline," the woman continued, materializing more solidly beside her. "I am Seraphina, the last of our line. Until now." "That's impossible," Lyra breathed. But even as she spoke, she could feel something stirring within her, a power that had long lay dormant. "I'm nobody. I'm just a servant." Seraphina's laugh was bitter. "They made you believe that. They hid you among the forgotten, hoping your power would never manifest. But fate has a way of revealing the truth." The visions in the mirror shifted, showing her a great war between werewolves and creatures of shadow. She watched in horror as beings like herself commanded armies of darkness, their power terrible and absolute. Then she saw the aftermath, a kingdom in ruins, bloodlines extinguished, and a desperate alliance formed to ensure such devastation could never happen again. "The Shadow Moon line was thought extinct," Seraphina explained. "We were hunted, killed, or driven into exile. But one survived, hidden her true nature, and bore a daughter who would carry the bloodline forward." Above them, Kael burst through the castle doors, his enhanced senses finally catching a trace of Lyra's scent. It led him through winding passages he'd never seen before, past portraits of long-dead nobles whose eyes seemed to follow his movement. The Alpha King and his guards followed at a distance, their own curiosity overriding their wariness. "The magic calls to her," the Alpha King murmured to his advisor. "If she truly is what the prophecies speak of, we may have already lost." Kael's wolf raged within him, demanding he find his mate and protect her from whatever forces sought to manipulate her. He could feel her presence, growing stronger as he descended, but with it came something else, a darkness that made his fur stand on end. In the chamber below, Lyra watched as the mirror showed her two possible futures. In one, she embraced her power and brought balance to the werewolf kingdom, using her abilities to heal old wounds and forge new alliances. In the other, she succumbed to the darkness within her bloodline, becoming a destroyer who would reduce the world to ash and shadow. "The choice is yours," Seraphina said, her form beginning to fade. "But know that others will try to make it for you. Trust only your heart and remember, power without love becomes tyranny, but love without power cannot protect what matters most." The mirror's surface began to crack, spiderweb fractures spreading across its ancient glass. As it shattered, each fragment caught and reflected the silver light, sending dancing patterns across the chamber walls. Lyra felt the power within her surge, responding to the release of whatever force had been contained within the mirror. Her scream of pain and transformation echoed through the castle, reaching Kyle just as he found the hidden entrance to the chamber. The sounds spoke of a fundamental change occurring, of a girl dying and something far more dangerous being born. The ancient stones beneath my feet seemed to pulse with a life of their own as I descended deeper into the temple's hidden chambers. Kyle's hand remained firmly clasped in mine, his warmth the only anchor keeping me tethered to reality as visions of the past continued to assault my senses. Each step forward brought new flashes of memory that weren't my own, ceremonies conducted in moonlight, blood spilled on sacred altars, and always, the haunting melody that seemed to call from the very walls themselves. "The bloodline remembers," whispered the elderly priestess who had guided us here, her voice barely audible above the echo of our footsteps. "Even when the mind forgets, the blood remembers everything." My fingers tingled where they touched the rough stone wall, and suddenly I was elsewhere, standing in this same corridor centuries ago, watching as my ancestors performed rituals that made my stomach clench with their dark purpose. They weren't the noble guardians I'd imagined. They were something far more complex, wielding power that could heal or destroy with equal ease. Tael's voice cut through the vision, grounding me in the present. His silver eyes held concern as he studied my face. "Your eyes, they're glowing again." I blinked hard, trying to shake off the lingering images. "I'm seeing their memories. The Moonborn weren't just protectors, Kyle. They were—" I struggled for the right words. "They were judges. They decided who lived and who died among our kind." The priestess nodded gravely. "The old texts speak of the great culling, when the last Moonborn ended the war between the packs by eliminating entire bloodlines she deemed too dangerous to survive. Your great-grandmother's final act before she disappeared was to split the kingdom, rather than see it destroyed completely." A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the cool air in the underground chamber. She created the division between the regions, the territories that keep the packs separated. A prison of her own design, the priestess confirmed, but also a protection. She knew that, without barriers, the strongest would consume the weakest until nothing remained. We emerged into a circular chamber lit by phosphorescent crystals embedded in the ceiling. At its center stood a pool of water so still it might have been black glass, and carved around its rim were symbols that seemed to shift and writhe when I wasn't looking directly at them. "The Seeing Pool," the priestess announced. "Here you may witness what was, what is, and what may yet come to pass. But be warned, knowledge, once gained, cannot be forgotten." Kyle squeezed my hand. "You don't have to do this. We can find another way to understand your heritage." But even as he spoke, I was already moving toward the pool. The pull was irresistible, as if invisible threads were drawing me forward. "No, I need to know. The Alpha King is gathering his forces, and if I'm truly the key to stopping him, I have to understand what that means." The water's surface began to shimmer as I approached, and suddenly images formed in its depths. I saw myself as I might become, standing atop a mountain with power crackling around me like lightning, my hair white as moonbeams and my eyes blazing with otherworldly light. In one vision, I brought wolves to kneel before me in peace. In another, I stood over their ashes as the kingdom burned. "The choice hasn't been made yet," I whispered, understanding flooding through me. "The prophecy isn't about what I will do, it's about what I could do." "All power corrupts," the priestess said softly, "but the Moonborn bloodline was designed to bear corruption without breaking. The question is whether you will choose to wield that power with wisdom or with wrath." A new image formed in the pool, the Alpha King's palace, where I could see preparations for war being made. Soldiers gathered in the courtyards, weapons were distributed, and at the center of it all stood Marcus Ravencrest himself, his golden eyes burning with ambition as he studied maps of the surrounding territories. "He knows where you are," Kyle said grimly, reading the same scene I was witnessing. "Look at the markers on his maps, they're tracking your movements." I watched in horror as the vision showed Marcus speaking with a figure cloaked in shadow, exchanging what appeared to be payment for information. When the figure turned slightly, I caught a glimpse of a familiar profile. "Thomas," I breathed, recognizing one of the servants who had helped us escape. "He's been reporting our location all along." The betrayal cut deep, but there was no time to dwell on it. In the pool's surface, I could see Marcus's forces already mobilizing, moving toward our location with terrifying efficiency. We had perhaps hours before they arrived at the temple. I straightened, feeling the ancient power in my bloodline stir to life more strongly than ever before. The choice the priestess spoke of was coming whether I was ready or not. The ancient stone walls of the underground chamber seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy as Kaya stood before the crystalline pool. Moonlight filtered through hidden crevices above, casting silver patterns across the water's surface that moved independently of any earthly source. Elder Thorn's weathered hands trembled as he lit the ceremonial candles surrounding the sacred space. "The bloodline awakening hasn't been performed in over 3 centuries, he whispered, his voice echoing in the cavernous room. "Your ancestors were the last to undergo this ritual, and they—" He paused, studying her face in the flickering light. "They didn't survive it." Kaya's heart hammered against her ribs, but she forced herself to remain still. Behind her, she could hear Damon's restless pacing, his boots scraping against the stone floor. The mate bond between them thrummed with his anxiety, making it impossible to ignore his presence even when she couldn't see him. "What exactly does the ritual entail?" Damon's voice cut through the silence, sharp with protective instinct. Elder Thorn turned toward him, his ancient eyes reflecting centuries of hidden knowledge. The Shadowborn bloodline was never meant to remain dormant. It requires activation through exposure to pure lunar essence, but the process— He gestured toward intricate symbols carved into the chamber walls. "The power that awakens could consume her from within if she isn't strong enough to contain it." "Then we find another way," Damon said immediately, moving to stand beside Kaya. His presence sent warmth cascading through her body, but she could feel the tremor in his muscles, the barely contained urge to sweep her away from this place. "There is no other way." The new voice belonged to Lyra, who emerged from the shadows at the chamber's entrance. Her silver hair gleamed in the candlelight as she approached, carrying an ornate wooden box. "The Alpha King's forces have surrounded the sanctuary. They know she's here, and they're preparing for a siege. We have hours at most before they break through our defenses." Kaya closed her eyes, feeling the weight of destiny pressing down on her shoulders. In the distance, she could hear the faint sounds of conflict, shouting voices, the clash of weapons, the howls of wolves preparing for battle. The peaceful sanctuary that had sheltered them was becoming a war zone. "Show me," she said quietly, opening her eyes to meet Elder Thorn's concerned gaze. "Show me what I need to do." The elder nodded solemnly and opened the box Lyra had brought. Inside, nestled in black velvet, lay a pendant unlike anything Kaya had ever seen. The stone at its center seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, and strange symbols were etched around its circumference in what looked like silver fire. "This belonged to your grandmother," Elder Thorn explained, lifting the pendant with reverent care. "It will help channel the lunar energy and prevent it from overwhelming your mortal form. But once you begin the awakening, there's no stopping it. The power will either accept you or destroy you." Damon's hand found hers, his fingers intertwining with desperate strength. Through their bond, she felt his fear, his love, and something else, a fierce determination that made her breath catch. He would stand with her regardless of the consequences. "If something goes wrong," she began, but he silenced her with a look. "Nothing will go wrong," he said firmly. "I won't let it." Elder Thorn fastened the pendant around her neck, and immediately Kaya felt a strange tingling sensation spreading through her chest. The stone seemed to pulse in rhythm with her heartbeat, growing warmer with each passing second. "Step into the pool," the elder instructed. "The water has been blessed with herbs and lunar magic passed down through generations. It will help your body adjust to the transformation." The water was surprisingly warm as Kaya waded in, reaching her waist before she stopped in the center of the pool. Above, the patterns of moonlight began to shift and swirl, as if responding to her presence. The pendant against her chest grew almost hot, and she could feel something stirring deep within her, a power that had been sleeping for her entire life. "Remember," Elder Thorn called out, his voice seeming to come from very far away. "Don't fight the power. Let it flow through you, become part of you. The Shadowborn were never meant to control their abilities through force, but through harmony." The moonlight suddenly intensified, becoming a focused beam that struck the water around her. Kaya gasped as energy surged through her body, electric and ancient and completely overwhelming. Her vision blurred, and she could hear Damon calling her name, but his voice seemed distorted, as if filtered through water or dreams. Pain lanced through her spine, followed by a sensation of expansion, as if her very soul was stretching beyond the confines of her physical form. The pendant blazed against her skin, and somewhere in the chaos of transformation she heard the distant sound of splintering wood. The Alpha King's forces had broken through the sanctuary's defenses. The ancient stone chamber beneath the castle felt alive with power as Lyra pressed her palm against the crystalline altar. The moment her skin made contact, the entire room erupted in silver light, and she gasped as visions flooded her mind like a torrential river. She saw herself as a child, but not the orphaned servant she remembered being. Instead, she witnessed a small girl with silver hair running through moonlit gardens, while her mother, a woman with eyes like starlight, called after her with laughter in her voice. The woman wore a crown of twisted silver, and her presence made the very air shimmer with ancient magic. "The last moonborn," Elder Thorn's voice echoed from somewhere far away, though she could feel his weathered hand steadying her shoulder. "Your mother was Luna Selene, the last true Lunar Queen before the bloodlines were severed." The visions shifted, showing her a great battle where wolves with silver-tipped fur fought alongside creatures of shadow and flame. At the center of it all stood her mother, hands raised toward a blood-red moon, drawing down power that crackled through the air like lightning. But something went wrong. The magic turned violent, consuming everything in its path. "She tried to bind the shadow wolves," Thorn continued, his voice heavy with old grief, "to save our kind from their corruption, but the ritual required a sacrifice she wasn't prepared to make." Lyra saw her mother's horrified face as the magic spiraled out of control, saw her use the last of her strength to cast a spell that would hide her daughter's true nature. The woman's final act was to scatter her own life force across the kingdom, sealing away the bloodline magic until it was truly needed. The visions faded, leaving Lyra trembling and gasping. When her sight cleared, she found Kyle standing in the doorway, his dark eyes wide with concern and something that looked like recognition. "How long have you been there?" she whispered, her voice hoarse from the magical strain. "Long enough," he said, stepping into the chamber. The silver light from the altar cast strange shadows across his scarred face. "Long enough to understand why I was drawn to you from the moment I saw you." Elder Thorn moved between them, his expression grave. "The shadow wolves are growing stronger. We've received reports from the northern territories. Entire packs have been turned, their minds consumed by the darkness. Without the moonborn magic to counter them, our kingdom will fall within a fortnight." Lyra pulled her hand away from the altar, but she could still feel its power humming beneath her skin. "What exactly am I supposed to do? I don't know how to use this magic. I didn't even know I had it until an hour ago." "The knowledge is in your blood," Thorn said, "but awakening it fully requires a bond with an alpha, whose strength can anchor the magic without being consumed by it." His ancient eyes shifted meaningfully between Lyra and Kyle. Kyle's jaw tightened. "You're talking about a true mating bond, Not just a claiming, but a soul binding that can't be undone. The risk is considerable, Thorn admitted. If Kael's wolf isn't strong enough to contain the moonborn magic, it could destroy you both. And if Lyra can't control the power once it's awakened, she could suffer the same fate as her mother. The weight of their situation settled over the chamber like a heavy shroud. Lyra looked at Kael, seeing the conflict written across his features. He'd already risked everything by claiming her, by defying the Alpha King and bringing her here. Now she was asking him to risk his very soul. "There has to be another way," she said, but even as the words left her lips, she knew they weren't true. Deep in her newly awakened magical consciousness, she could sense the shadow wolves spreading like a plague across the kingdom. Every hour they delayed meant more innocent wolves would be lost to the darkness. Kael stepped closer, reaching out to cup her face in his hands. "Tell me what you want, Lyra. Not what the kingdom needs, not what your bloodline demands. What do you want?" The intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. Despite everything that had happened, despite the revelations about her identity and the weight of destiny pressing down on them, she realized her answer hadn't changed. "I want to choose my own fate," she said quietly, "and I choose you." Something shifted in the air around them, a recognition that went deeper than words. Kael's wolf stirred restlessly beneath his skin, responding to the magic that now flowed freely through her veins. "Then we do this together," he said, pressing his forehead against hers. "Whatever comes next, we face it as mates." Elder Thorn nodded solemnly. "The ritual must be performed at moonrise. I'll make the preparations." He paused at the chamber entrance. "The Alpha King's forces are still searching for you both. Once we begin, there will be no going back." As his footsteps faded into the darkness above, Lyra and Kael remained in the silver-lit chamber, holding each other while the weight of their destiny settled around them like an unbreakable chain. The ancient tome felt heavy in my hands as I turned its yellowed pages, each one crackling with age and secrets. Kael sat beside me in the dusty archives beneath the packhouse, his presence both comforting and distracting as we searched for answers about my bloodline. "Yeah," he said, his finger tracing across a faded illustration. "The Shadow Blood Pack. They were the original peacekeepers between the supernatural realms." I leaned closer, studying the intricate drawing of wolves with silver markings along their spines, markings identical to the ones that had begun appearing on my own skin since the awakening of my powers. The text was written in an ancient dialect, but somehow the words seemed to shimmer and rearrange themselves as I read. "They could walk between worlds," I whispered, translating the archaic script. "Bridge the gap between life and death, light and shadow. But the power came with a terrible price." Kael's jaw tightened. "What kind of price?" Before I could answer, a familiar coldness swept through the chamber. The torches flickered, and shadows began pooling in the corners like living things. I shot to my feet, my newly awakened senses screaming danger. "He's found us," I breathed. Marcus emerged from the darkness as if he'd been part of it, his eyes glowing with that unnatural silver light that had haunted my dreams. But he wasn't alone. Behind him stood a woman I'd never seen before, tall, ethereal, with skin pale as moonlight and hair that moved like liquid shadow. "Lady Alara Shadowblood," the woman said, inclining her head in a mockery of respect. "I am Morgana, and I've been searching for you for a very long time." Kael moved to stand protectively in front of me, but I placed a hand on his arm. Something about her presence felt familiar, like an echo of something I'd forgotten. "You're one of them," I said. "One of my kind." Morgana's smile was sharp as a blade. "The very last of the elder bloodline, yes. I've been waiting centuries for another to manifest the true power. But you, dear child, are so much more than I hoped for." "Stay away from her," Kael growled, his wolf rising to the surface. "Oh, but she needs to understand what she truly is," Morgana purred, circling us like a predator. "Tell me, Alara, when you dream, do you see the other realm? the place where lost souls wander in eternal twilight. My blood turned to ice. She was describing the visions that had been plaguing me, glimpses of a grey world where ghostly figures reached out with desperate eyes, begging for something I didn't understand. The shadow blood were never meant to just keep peace, Morgana continued. We were gatekeepers, guardians of the veil between the world of the living and the realm of the dead. And that veil is weakening. Marcus stepped forward, his expression unreadable. Show her the truth, Morgana. Show her what's at stake. Before I could protest, Morgana raised her hands, and the air around us shimmered. Suddenly, we weren't in the archives anymore. We stood on a vast, barren plain under a starless sky. In the distance, I could see tears in the very fabric of reality, wounds in the world through which pale, grasping hands emerged. The dead are breaking through, Morgana explained, her voice echoing strangely in this otherworldly space. Without a shadow blood to maintain the barriers, both realms will collapse into chaos. The living will be overrun by vengeful spirits, and the dead will never find peace. Kyle's hand found mine, anchoring me as the horrific vision threatened to overwhelm my senses. This could just be an illusion, he said, but I could hear the doubt in his voice. Could be, I agreed, though deep in my bones I knew it wasn't. But what if it's real? Morgana gestured to one of the tiers in reality where ghostly figures were beginning to pour through. Your power is the key to sealing these rifts, but it requires a sacrifice. The shadow blood must choose to bind themselves to the veil, becoming one with it. You would exist between worlds, never fully alive nor dead, for all eternity. The vision dissolved, and we were back in the archives. I staggered, my mind reeling from what I'd witnessed. Everything I'd thought I understood about my destiny had just been shattered. There has to be another way, Kyle said fiercely. There's always another way. Morgana's expression softened slightly, and for a moment she looked genuinely sad. I spent 300 years searching for one, child. The magic is absolute. To save both worlds, one of shadow blood must make the ultimate sacrifice. Marcus had remained silent through the revelation, but now he spoke. That's why I needed to find you first, before Alpha King Lucian could bind you to his pack. Your power belongs to something greater than any one realm. I looked between them all, Morgana with her ancient sorrow, Marcus with his desperate determination, and Kael, whose love burned fierce and protective in his eyes. The weight of destiny pressed down on me like a physical thing. The choice that would determine the fate of two worlds was mine alone to make. The ancient stone chamber beneath the palace hummed with a power that made my teeth ache. Torchlight flickered across symbols carved so deep into the walls they seemed to breathe in the dancing shadows. Kai's hand never left mine as we descended the spiral staircase, his touch the only thing anchoring me to sanity as waves of ancestral memories crashed through my mind. The bloodline awakens, Elder Thorn whispered behind us, his voice carrying a mixture of awe and terror. I can feel it from here. Marcus flanked my other side, his massive frame tense with protective energy. The Alpha King had insisted on accompanying us despite the obvious strain it put on him to be so close to my emerging power. Every few steps, he would wince as another surge of ancient magic pulsed through the chamber. How much further? I managed to ask, my voice echoing strangely in the confined space. Just ahead, Kai replied, squeezing my fingers. The Moonwell Chamber. It's where your ancestors first bound themselves to the lunar cycles. The staircase opened into a vast circular room dominated by a pool of water so still it looked like polished obsidian. Moonlight streamed down through an opening in the ceiling, creating a silver pathway across the water's surface. But it was the figure standing beside the pool that made my heart stop. Hello, granddaughter. The woman who spoke could have been my twin, if not for the otherworldly glow surrounding her translucent form. Her silver hair cascaded past her shoulders, and her eyes held the same violet fire that had been burning in mine since the ceremony. You're dead, I breathed. She smiled sadly. Death is complicated for our kind. I've been waiting here for you, Sarah, waiting to explain what you must choose. Kai's grip tightened. Choose what? The spirit of my grandmother turned those ancient eyes on him. She must decide whether to embrace her full inheritance or let it die with her. Her gaze shifted to Marcus. Your Majesty knows the prophecy, don't you? Marcus stepped forward, his face grave. The last daughter of the moonborn line shall hold the power to either bind the curse that creates us or break it entirely. Bind it? My voice cracked. You mean I could stop lycanthropy from or strengthen it beyond anything the world has ever seen, my grandmother confirmed. The choice has always been yours to make, but only here, in this sacred place, during the 3 nights of the blood moon. I looked up through the opening above us. The moon hung heavy and red in the sky, its crimson light making the chamber feel like the inside of a beating heart. What happens if I choose to bind the curse? I asked. Every werewolf alive would become human again, she replied simply. The packs would dissolve, the hierarchy would crumble, centuries of culture and connection to the wild would vanish forever. And if I choose to break it, the curse would spread beyond those already born to it. Any human could become wolf with nothing more than a bite. The balance between our world and theirs would shatter. Kai moved to stand in front of me, his green eyes intense. There has to be a third option. There's always another way. My grandmother's expression softened. Smart boy. Yes, there is a third path, but it's the most dangerous of all. Tell me, I demanded. You could choose to become the curse's guardian instead of its destroyer or amplifier. Bind yourself to it permanently, become a living anchor that maintains the balance as it exists now. But the cost? She trailed off. What cost? Marcus stepped closer. She would live forever, but never fully as either human or wolf, always between, always alone, always carrying the weight of every lycanthrope's existence within her own soul. The chamber fell silent except for the gentle lapping of water against stone. I stared at the moonwell, seeing my reflection fractured in its dark surface. 3 faces looked back at me, human, wolf, and something else entirely. How long do I have to decide? I whispered. The blood moon lasts for 3 nights, my grandmother replied. Each night the choice becomes more permanent. Tonight you could still walk away, let the power fade. Tomorrow night only the extreme choices remain, bind or break. The third night I have to choose guardianship or watch the curse tear itself apart, I finished. She nodded solemnly. Kai's hand found my cheek, turning my face toward his. Whatever you choose, I'll stand by you, even if it means losing me forever. His jaw clenched. Even then, Marcus placed a heavy hand on my shoulder. The kingdom will support your decision, whatever it may be. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of countless futures pressing down on me. When I opened them again, my grandmother was already beginning to fade. Choose wisely, little moon daughter. The fate of 2 worlds rests in your hands. The ancient stone chamber beneath the castle trembled as Lyra's power surged through her veins like molten silver. She could feel every heartbeat of every werewolf in the kingdom above, their life forces pulsing in rhythm with her own. The prophecy scroll crumbled to ash in her hands, its words now burned into her memory forever. Lyra. Kyle's voice cut through the supernatural wind whipping around them. His dark eyes held no fear, only an unwavering trust that made her chest ache. You don't have to choose right now. But she did. The shadow wolves were already breaching the outer walls, their otherworldly howls echoing through the castle corridors. Alpha King Marcus and his forces were strong, but they couldn't hold back creatures born from nightmare itself. Not without help, not without her. The bloodline of the first Luna, she whispered, finally understanding. That's what I am. That's why my mother hid me away. Her power crested higher and cracks spider-webbed across the stone walls. She knew this day would come. Elder Thorn stepped forward, his weathered face grave. Your ancestor bound the Shadow Realm centuries ago, child. But that binding weakened with each generation. You're the last who can restore it, or destroy it entirely. The weight of 1,000 lives pressed down on her shoulders. Above them, she could hear the clash of battle, smell the metallic tang of blood in the air. Marcus was up there, leading his warriors against an enemy that shouldn't exist. And Kyle, her heart clenched. Kyle had defied everything he'd ever known to stand beside her. "If I restore the binding," she said, her voice barely audible over the mystical storm surrounding them, "what happens to me?" Thorn's silence was answer enough. Kyle moved to her side in an instant, his hand finding hers. The moment their skin touched, her power stabilized, the wild energy focusing into something more controlled. "There has to be another way." "There is," Thorn said quietly. "She could tear down the barriers entirely, unite the realms, but the cost would be everything," Lyra finished. She closed her eyes, feeling the pulse of the kingdom above. "So many lives, so much at stake. Show me." The elder's hands glowed with soft light as he pressed them to her temples. Visions flooded her mind. The first Luna, radiant and terrible, weaving silver light into chains that bound creatures of living shadow. The slow weakening over generations, the careful breeding, the hidden bloodline, all leading to this moment. And then she saw the choices laid bare before her. Restore the binding, save the kingdom, preserve the balance, sacrifice herself in the process. The shadows would return to their realm, sealed away for another 1,000 years. Destroy the barriers, merge the realms, transform everything with no guarantee of what would emerge from the chaos. She would survive, but the world as they knew it would end. "There's a third option." The voice came from the chamber entrance. Lyra's eyes snapped open to see her mother, Elena, standing in the doorway. Her servant's dress was torn and bloodied, but her eyes blazed with fierce determination. "I've been searching for it for 20 years. "Elena?" Thorn gasped. "But you're supposed to be dead." "Yes, I know." Elena strode into the chamber, pulling a crystal vial from her cloak. The liquid inside pulsed with the same silver light that danced around Lyra. "The blood of the first Luna, preserved in the deepest vaults of our ancestral home. I've spent 2 decades gathering every drop." Hope flared in Lyra's chest. "What does it do?" "It lets you share the burden." Elena's gaze shifted between Lyra and Kyle, a true mate bond, forged with the original Luna's blessing. "You don't have to choose between saving the kingdom and saving yourself. You can do both." The castle shook violently overhead, dust raining down from the ceiling. Time was running out. Kyle squeezed her hand. "Whatever you decide, I'm with you." Lyra looked at the vial, at her mother she'd thought dead, at the elder who'd revealed her destiny, at the rogue wolf who'd claimed her heart. The weight of choice still pressed down on her, but it felt different now. Shared. "The mate bond," she said. "It would make Kyle like me? Give him the same power?" "And the same responsibility," Elena confirmed. "You would be bound together in every way. Life, death, power, purpose. The binding ritual would require both your strengths, but you would both survive it." Above them, a wolf's howl of pain echoed through the stone. Marcus was losing ground. Lyra turned to Kyle, her silver eyes meeting his dark ones. A lifetime of carrying this burden, of being responsible for the balance between worlds. "Are you sure?" His answer was swift and certain. "I was sure the moment I saw you." She lifted the vial, its contents swirling like liquid starlight. "Then let's save our kingdom." The ancient chamber beneath the castle trembled as Lyra's power surged through the stone walls, each pulse of energy making the torches flicker with an otherworldly light. She stood at the center of the ritual circle carved into the floor, her blood still dripping onto the sacred symbols that had remained dormant for centuries. Kyle pressed himself against the wall beside the entrance, his wolf senses overwhelmed by the raw magic emanating from his mate. The bond between them thrummed with an intensity that made his bones ache, and he could feel every emotion coursing through her, determination, fear, and something else. Something that felt like goodbye. "Lyra, stop this," he pleaded, taking a cautious step forward. "Whatever you're doing, we can find another way." She turned to face him, and his breath caught. Her eyes blazed with silver fire, and ancient power rolled off her in waves. This wasn't just his Lyra anymore. She was something far older, far more dangerous than either of them had realized. "There is no other way," she said, her voice carrying harmonics that seemed to resonate from the very stones around them. "The shadow wolves are already at the kingdom's borders. They'll tear through our defenses within hours." Above them, the sounds of battle grew closer. Alpha King Matthias had rallied the pack warriors, but Lyra could feel their fear through the ancient bloodline connection that had awakened within her. The shadow wolves weren't just rogue werewolves. They were creatures of pure darkness, born from the same primordial magic that flowed through her veins. "My ancestor didn't just bind them," she continued, raising her hands as the symbols on the floor began to glow brighter. "She created them. The moon shadow bloodline has always been a double-edged sword. We can create or destroy, protect or condemn." Kael's heart clenched as understanding dawned. "You're going to use yourself as a conduit to send them back." "It's what I was born for." Tears streamed down her face, but her resolve never wavered. The prophecy was never about choosing between salvation and destruction. It was about sacrifice. The chamber door burst open, and Alpha King Matthias stumbled in, his clothes torn and bloodied from battle. Behind him came Elena, her usually pristine appearance disheveled from tending to wounded warriors. "The outer walls have fallen," Matthias gasped. "We have maybe 10 minutes before they reach the castle proper." Elena's eyes widened as she took in the scene. The glowing ritual circle, Lyra's transformed appearance, and the power that made the very air shimmer. "Dear goddess," she whispered, "you're really her descendant." "And I'm going to finish what she started," Lyra said firmly. She looked at each of them, memorizing their faces. "But you all need to leave. Now. When I complete the ritual, the magical backlash will kill you," Kael finished, his voice breaking. "No, I won't let you do this alone." He stepped into the circle despite the energy that tried to repel him, his love for her stronger than the ancient magic that sought to keep him away. The moment his feet crossed the carved lines, the bond between them flared to life, and Lyra gasped. "Kael, don't," she warned, but he was already moving toward her, his wolf's strength carrying him through the mystical barrier. "We're mates," he said simply, taking her hands in his. "If you're going to sacrifice yourself for the kingdom, then you're not doing it without me." The ritual circle pulsed, and suddenly Lyra could feel not just her own ancestral power, but something else flowing through their bond. Kael's strength, his unwavering loyalty, his fierce protectiveness, it all merged with her magic, creating something new. "The binding requires a willing sacrifice," Elena breathed, understanding flooding her features. "But it doesn't have to be death. It can be transformation." Outside, a howl echoed through the night, not the call of a natural wolf, but something far more sinister. The shadow wolves had reached the castle grounds. "We're out of time," Matthias said grimly. "Whatever you're going to do." Lyra closed her eyes and let the power flow through her completely, no longer fighting against her heritage, but embracing it fully. The ancient words came to her lips in a language that predated the kingdom itself, and the ritual circle blazed with silver light. But instead of drawing only on her own life force, she pulled from the bond she shared with Kael, from the love that connected them, from the hope of a future they might still have together. The magic responded differently this time, not hungry for destruction, but eager for balance. The light exploded outward, racing through the castle walls and beyond, seeking the shadow wolves that threatened everything they held dear. Lyra felt the moment it found them, felt their otherworldly screams as the binding spell took hold. As the light faded and silence fell over the kingdom, Lyra collapsed into Kael's arms, both of them forever changed by the magic they'd unleashed together. The ancient chamber beneath the castle trembled as Sarah's power coursed through the stone walls, her bloodline awakening to its full potential. The crimson light emanating from her hands cast dancing shadows across the faces of those who had followed her into the depths, Kyle, Alpha King Magnus, and the handful of loyalists who had chosen to stand against the Shadow Moon Pack's rebellion. Above them, the sounds of battle raged through the corridors as Darius's forces clashed with what remained of Magnus's guard. But here, in this sacred space where the first werewolf kings had been crowned, Sarah felt the weight of destiny settling upon her shoulders like a mantle she had never asked to wear. The ritual must be completed before the moon reaches its zenith. Elder Thorn's voice echoed from the ancient text spread across the stone altar. His weathered hands traced the symbols that seemed to pulse with life under Sarah's growing power. If the bloodline bond isn't sealed properly, the magic will consume everything within 100 miles. Kyle's jaw tightened as he stepped closer to Sarah, his wolf instincts screaming warnings about the dangerous energy radiating from her skin. "Tell me what I need to do." "It's not just about you," Magnus interrupted, his regal bearing intact despite the blood staining his ceremonial robes. "The ritual requires 3 elements: the last daughter of the original bloodline, her chosen mate, and the blessing of the current Alpha King. Without all 3 working in harmony, the magic will turn destructive." Sarah's breath came in short gasps as another wave of power surged through her. The ancient magic was demanding release, and she could feel it growing stronger with each passing moment. "How long do we have?" Thorn glanced toward the narrow window where silver moonlight was beginning to filter through. 20 minutes, perhaps less. A thunderous crash from somewhere above sent dust raining down from the ceiling. Darius's forces were getting closer, and they all knew that the rogue Alpha would stop at nothing to claim Sarah's power for himself. "Then we begin now," Sarah said, her voice carrying an authority that surprised even her. She moved to the center of the ritual circle carved into the ancient stone, feeling the symbols respond to her presence with warm pulses of recognition. Kyle followed without hesitation, taking his place beside her as Thorn had instructed. The mate bond between them hummed with intensity, stronger now that her true nature was revealed. When their hands touched, sparks of silver and gold light danced between their fingers. Magnus approached more slowly, the weight of his decision evident in every step. By participating in this ritual, he was essentially abdicating his throne to whatever power Sarah might become. But as another explosion shook the chamber, he squared his shoulders and took his position at the third point of the triangle. "Sarah," Thorn began, his voice taking on the cadence of ancient ceremony, "daughter of the first moon, heir to the blood that shaped our kind, do you accept the responsibility of your heritage?" The words seemed to unlock something deep within her chest. Images flashed through her mind, memories that weren't her own, stretching back through generations of her ancestors. She saw the first werewolf transformation, witnessed the founding of the kingdom, felt the hopes and fears of every woman in her bloodline who had carried this burden. "I accept," she whispered, and the chamber filled with silver light. Kyle felt the bond between them deepen as Thorn turned to him. "Kyle of the Northern Territories, rogue by choice but loyal by nature, do you bind yourself to this power, to guard it and guide it for the protection of all werewolf kind?" The weight of the question settled heavily on his shoulders. He had spent years running from responsibility, from the politics and power games that had destroyed his original pack. But looking at Sarah, seeing the trust in her eyes despite everything they had endured, he knew his running days were over. "I bind myself willingly," he said, and golden light joined the silver. Magnus straightened as Thorn's attention turned to him. The formal words of abdication came easier than he had expected, perhaps because he could see that the kingdom would be in capable hands. As he spoke his part of the ritual, crimson light added itself to the growing radiance. The 3 colors began to spiral together, creating patterns of incredible beauty that seemed to sing with power. But even as the magic built toward its crescendo, the chamber door exploded inward. Darius stood in the doorway, his eyes wild with rage and desperate hunger. Behind him, a dozen of his most loyal followers spread out to block any escape routes. "Stop this now," he snarled, his partially shifted form radiating menace. "That power belongs to the strongest, not to some servant girl playing at being queen." Sarah felt the ritual magic wavering as fear tried to break her concentration, but Kael's steady presence beside her and Magnus's unwavering determination held the circle together. "You're too late," she told Darius, her voice carrying the authority of ages. "The choice has already been made." The ancient stones of the ceremonial circle pulsed with otherworldly energy as Lyra stood at its center, her bloodline's power coursing through her veins like liquid starlight. The symbols carved into her skin by generations of forgotten magic glowed silver-white against the gathering dusk. Every werewolf present could feel it, the raw, primordial force that had been dormant for centuries, now awakening in the girl they had dismissed as nothing more than a servant. Kael stepped forward, his dark eyes never leaving her face. The rogue werewolf who had crashed the Alpha King's ceremony now stood as her chosen protector, his own transformation rippling beneath his skin. "Whatever you decide, I stand with you," he said, his voice carrying across the silent gathering. "Mate or not, your choice is yours alone." Alpha King Aldrich remained motionless at the edge of the circle, his intended bride Seraphina forgotten beside him. The golden wolf who ruled the kingdom watched as everything he had built threatened to crumble before this slip of a girl who carried the blood of the ancients. His advisors whispered urgently behind him, but their words were lost in the wind that had begun to swirl around Lyra. "The prophecy speaks of choice," Elder Morgana's weathered voice cut through the tension. The ancient seer stepped into the light cast by Lyra's glowing marks. The last of the bloodline will either unite the packs or scatter them to the winds, but the choice has always been hers to make. Lyra felt the weight of every gaze upon her. In her mind, she could hear the voices of her ancestors, the original werewolves who had first walked between worlds, who had bound their essence to the moon itself. They whispered of power beyond imagination, of the ability to reshape the very fabric of their society. She could feel the corruption that had seeped into the kingdom over generations, the way the strong preyed upon the weak, the way those like her were ground down into nothing. With a thought, she could burn it all away. But as her power reached its crescendo, threatening to spill over into devastating action, she felt a warm hand slip into hers. Kael's touch anchored her, reminded her of something beyond rage and retribution. His fingers intertwined with hers, and she saw in his eyes not fear of her power, but faith in her heart. "I've spent my life believing I was nothing," Lyra said, her voice somehow carrying to every corner of the gathering despite its soft tone. "A servant, invisible and unworthy. You taught me that, all of you." Her gaze swept across the assembled wolves, landing briefly on Aldrich. "Your kingdom thrives on hierarchy, on the belief that some are born to rule and others to serve. But what if that's wrong?" The light emanating from her skin began to shift, moving from the harsh silver of destruction to something warmer, more golden. "I could tear down everything you've built. The power runs through me to do it. But destruction only creates more suffering, more of the same cycles that brought us to this moment." She turned to face each section of the gathering. The noble wolves with their fine clothes and sneering expressions, the guards who had looked through her for years, the servants who had shared her invisible existence. "Instead, I choose transformation." The power erupted from her then, but not in the violent wave they had expected. Instead, it flowed outward like a gentle tide, touching every werewolf present. As it passed through them, barriers that had existed for generations began to crumble. The rigid caste system that determined worth by birth order and bloodline strength started to dissolve. The magic didn't destroy, it revealed. It showed them all the connections they shared, the fundamental equality of their wolf spirits. Alpha King Aldrich gasped as he felt his absolute authority slip away, replaced by something more complex, the responsibility to truly serve rather than simply rule. Across the gathering, servants found their voices, their confidence. Noble wolves felt the weight of their privilege and the call to use it more wisely. "This is your chance," Lyra continued, her hand still firmly clasped in Kael's. "All of you, to build something better, A kingdom where worth isn't determined by bloodline or birth order, where power serves rather than oppresses. As the magical transformation completed its work, she finally turned to Kyle. The rogue wolf who had claimed her as his mate stood tall beside her, his own eyes now glowing with reflected starlight. "And you?" she asked. "Are you ready for a world where a servant girl and a rogue can reshape a kingdom?" His answer was a kiss that tasted of moonlight and new beginnings, witnessed by an entire kingdom in the throes of becoming something unprecedented. When they broke apart, Lyra looked out at the faces surrounding them, no longer divided by artificial hierarchies, but united in the work of building something worthy of the magic that flowed through them all. The last of the ancient bloodline had made her choice, and the werewolf kingdom would never be the same.